Well, Georgia's Papaconstantinou is in Athens, where he was until very recently a government minister. He's now a PASOK candidate in Greece's forthcoming elections and is taking an anxious interest in the events there. Paul Krugman is a Nobel Prize-winning economist who's betting on a Greek exit from the Eurozone in the pretty near future. Now, he's here. Do you think as a currency the euro is worth saving?
Yes. I mean, I think it was a mistake, but it's a very different thing to say that it should never have been done and then to say that it should be allowed to collapse. So I would like to save the euro, but I don't think Greece in the euro is now a reasonable proposition.
Now, Georgia's Papaconstantinou, why is leaving the euro a bad idea from the Greek perspective?
Well, first of all, can I take issue with your bad kebab analogy, which I find offensive? The Greek economy is in a crisis, and the Greek people are going through a lot, and they deserve some respect. And I really did not find that very appropriate. Coming to your question,
by all means,
leaving the euro would lead to a reduction with GDP falling by over 20%. It would double today's extremely high unemployment from 20% to over 30, 40%. It would lead to a halving of living standards and to widespread poverty. So today's situation is very difficult and very bad, but leaving the euro would lead the economy back to the 50s and 60s, and that's not something that we want to live through.
I would actually support. I think that was actually quite inappropriate to say that the Greeks have done something terribly wrong. They made errors. But the trouble and the reason, it's going to be awful. If Greece exits, it's going to be awful, at least in the short run. The trouble is that the situation for Greece is hopeless, and I mean that in a quite literal sense. Under the euro, there is nothing on the horizon to suggest any recovery ever. We're looking at extremely high unemployment, being shut out of the capital markets as far as the eye can see. And while an exit would be terrible, you can see how a recovery could happen afterwards. And I understand that nobody wants to bite that bullet. Nobody wants to take that decision, which is why I think the decision will be taken out of the hands of the politicians. It will simply happen. But if anyone could give me any story by which Greece ever returns to prosperity or even a halfway acceptable situation while staying within the euro, I'd be happy to reconsider. But I have not seen that story.
Do you imagine such a story, Georgia's Papaconstantinou?
Actually, I do, and I differ here with Paul. I think that clearly we need much more time than what the current program gives us to put the finances in order, but we're very close to running a primary surplus. The main problem is the economy isn't growing, and the economy isn't growing. It wasn't growing before the bailout. It was actually in recession since 2008, before we started the austerity package, but clearly the austerity package has made things much worse. So we need growth, and growth needs to come with the help of our European partners through some kind of a growth package, with confidence returning and investment flowing back in. We have a privatization program which should attract foreign investment. For all this to work, you have to have a stabilized situation, and at the moment, Europe is not giving the right signals. There's been some progress in improving the institutional architecture, but not enough, and the big moves have not been made yet. I am hopeful that there is a wind of change in Europe at the moment, following also the French election, which will change the emphasis away from exclusively looking at austerity, balancing it more with growth, and having the banks being able to bring again liquidity into the system. Because at the moment you have both a demand not being there because wages and salaries have been cut, and also a banking system which is not functioning and therefore doesn't provide even working capital.
From a political point of view, how close are things to unmanageable there?
We've had a very fragmented election result, and we're going into election where, as you said, the result is hanging in the air. The polls at the moment give the Conservatives and the left party Syriza pretty much equal results. So it's touch and go where this will. It's clear that the problems are too big for one party to shoulder this. We tried this for 2 years. Yeah, we had an absolute majority in parliament, and we failed because we could not shoulder this by ourselves.
My sense is that in fact the coalition in Greece was doing doing its damnedest, doing all of the things it was asked to do. And the trouble is that that was not producing growth, that nothing plausibly on the horizon will produce growth. Even if the sternness of European austerity demands is being reduced a little bit, that's not going to produce growth. Greece is still highly uncompetitive on costs. The notion that you can close that gap through structural reforms in any reasonable time framework is unreasonable. It's all very reminiscent. Some of us, cut our teeth in a way on the Argentine crisis more than a decade ago, and it was in some ways easier because they still did have their own currency, but it was the same thing. There was no plausible route back to an acceptable economic situation except via devaluation. And I think that's going to be the case here. We just don't see how this is ever going to be resolved otherwise.
Remember, however, that in the last 2 years we clawed back half of the competitiveness that was lost in unit labor cost terms since the entry into the euro. And that Greece has some comparative advantages, some existing ones such as tourism, shipping, and some new ones around energy, renewables, logistics. Its geographical position makes it a very important play in the broader region. So it does have the natural resources, the people, the ideas to move forward.
But it cost you
power. To get the engine going.
And eventually you lost power.
Well, but I'm going to say, I mean, I actually take the same thing. I think there's a lot of fundamental strengths, which are reasons why Greece, after an exit, might recover much more quickly than people think. But the notion that there's that the exports essentially is going to require exports one way or another. The notion that the exports are going to come on stream fast enough with under the current regime to avoid what is an ongoing catastrophe becoming unmanageable. I mean, it's just, I mean, I'd love to believe that you're right. I really would love, because this is a horrible situation. It's a trap. It's not the fault of the Greeks for the most part. But my God, this is not, how much longer can this last? And the action forcing event will, of course, be people pulling money out of Greek banks, and the ECB either has to offer unlimited credit, in effect, with no security, or pull the plug. And maybe they'll do that. Maybe they'll string this on for another year, but I find it hard to believe.
Are you getting any signs in Athens of concessions about to be made to you?
I think it's quite clear that the Troika is realizing, also partly as a result of the election result, but partly also looking at the fundamentals of the economy, that something's got to give. And if you ask any economist, they will tell you that the fiscal path that we've been following is extreme. We reduced the primary deficit by 8 percentage points in 2 years. That has never been done before. And to continue on this path without giving it some slack makes no sense. Because the more you hit on the fiscal side, the more difficult structural reforms become. Because the society is in such a difficult situation that it's very hard to get acceptance around necessary reforms, but reformers are always have people who oppose them. Therefore, you do need, and I think that the Troika is ready to give, and our European partners, in particular Germany, because it comes down to that, certainly some leeway on the pace of the fiscal side.
Okay, thank you very much.
And hopefully on some other issues as well.
Right, good. Thank you very much indeed.